I want to welcome you today to the symposium, which is part of the Tennessee Valley Jazz Society's larger program examining the impact of music and the civil rights movement in Alabama. But today, the topic is the humanity of music and the civil rights movement. So we're not going to focus so much on Alabama today. Let me read this before we begin. This project is presented by the Tennessee Valley Jazz Society and is made possible due to a grant from Alabama Humanities Alliance with support from other community partners. And I'd like to welcome our panelists today. In fact, I'd like to have our panelists go ahead and introduce themselves, say a little bit about yourself. So we'll start with Dr. Osterman. Go ahead, you start first.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I am Eurydice Osterman. I retired from Oakwood University. I taught theory and composition there for many, many years. And I'm an active composer. As a matter of fact, I have 2 commissions on my plate right now. Okay. I'm working on, and it's retirement is just a word that I don't know what it means. And but it's great. You know, it's great to be able to do what I want to do when I want to do it and how I want to do it, you know, on my terms.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Dr. Brinson.
Yes, Dr. Brinson down here in the great city of New Orleans. I also am a composer and a performer, conductor. And we're working now. I work at the Ellis Marcellus Center right now, where we have kids, you know, underprivileged kids, and we give them the highest amount of tutelage we can. They rub shoulders with some of our kids have been on the Harry Connick show. Harry Connick is actually one of my bosses, and right. And has been on the show with also Ellis was my teacher in high school, remained my friend for life up until his death. We've worked on projects together and perform on stage together as well. Also, I'm married to the great Yolanda E. Brinson. I got to say that because she's going to watch this, and I must say that okay, so I stay out of trouble.
Yeah, you got to keep peace at home, man. It's all right.
Man, all the time. And I've worked with several groups. We've done a number of things. We've done some video things as well. That's on YouTube. You can check them out with 7 a.m. and a number of other groups. About me.
Okay. Mr. Lundy, Mr. Curtis Lundy, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm very thankful and grateful to be here. My name is Curtis Lundy, and I'm a humble jazz musician, for the lack of a better, because I don't have a doctor in front of my name. However, I am operating, and I'm operating by His divine grace.
Amen.
And I'm privileged to be on this panel with 2 people who I respect a whole lot, and also just very interested to see the different perspective that we all have in terms of what we need to speak about and what we will speak about today.
Okay.
In terms of, I don't talk about accolades or anything like that. I've just been fortunate enough to be able to play with some of the greatest musicians that I've ever known, and that's in itself has been something that's been a blessing to me in my life. So with that, you know, that's what I speak of and what I know about.
All right, thank you very much, Curtis. And if Curtis won't, you know, toot his own horn, I'll toot it a little bit, because he is a musician that I really respect. You know, a guy who's been out there on the front lines, who's played with people like Betty Carter, Johnny Griffin, and, you know, some great jazz musicians, and Bobby Watson and others. So, you know, I'm always going to sing Curtis's praises because I respect him a great deal as a musician and as a person. But let's begin. First of all, let me begin by sort of I guess sort of laying out the format.
Well, Douglas, sir, who are you, first of all, sir?
I didn't introduce myself. Well, yeah, okay. So I'm Douglas Turner. I'm a professor of political science at Alabama A&M University. I'm also a announcer. That when I was growing up, we called them DJs, but I am an announcer. I have a jazz program on WJAB 90.9 FM that I've been hosting and producing for now over 30 years, and for the last 8 years, the program has been nationally syndicated. It's syndicated by the African American Public Radio Consortium and NPR. So, I'm proud about that. I've been a long time jazz listener. I'm not a musician, but I consider myself somewhat knowledgeable about the music. And so, I've moderated a number of programs like this for Tennessee Valley Jazz Society. And also let me say that Mr. Bankhead, Mr. Howard Bankhead, of course, I want to acknowledge Mr. Bankhead and his efforts. He's one of the people who sort of keeps the jazz flame burning here in Huntsville. And, I always say that Bank has some great ideas. He sometimes he wants to do too much. We have to kind of rein him in, but
that's right.
Bank is the person who's behind a lot of this. So I want to acknowledge that. So Mr. Bankhead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Very much, Douglas. Yes. But hey, Douglas, I'm going to say this is the 40th year of the Tennessee Valley Jazz Society. So we're celebrating 40 years, man, of presenting jazz here in Alabama and the world. I'm glad to be here.
Okay. All right. So let's begin today, once again, just kind of laying out the format. And when Bank asked me to do this, I started doing a little bit of research in terms of the topic, and because at first, once again, Bank had this sort of grand vision of what he wanted to do with this program, but I had to kind of get him to narrow it down some. And so in the process of doing that, I think we divided the discussion into two areas, right? One of them will be sort of looking at the impact of the movement on music, right? And sort of looking at music that was intrinsic to the movement, music that sort of came out of the experience of the movement and inspired people who were part of the movement. So that's one part of it. The second part is to look at the impact of the movement on artists, right? So the first part is to look at the impact of the movement on the kind of music that those who were involved in the movement sort of gravitated to. But then also there's this other thing about how the movement then influenced musicians and artists, right? And in particular, jazz musicians, because the Tennessee Valley Jazz Society is sponsoring this. So we want to make jazz a part of this discussion. So that's the two areas that we're going to focus on. Okay, so let's begin first though, and I asked Dr. Brinson and Dr. Osterman about whether or not they were ethnomusicologists, and as they said in their introduction, they're not. They're performers and composers. But Curtis, I believe you are ethnomusicologist. Am I correct?
Yeah, I would take that title. Yes, okay, I would
take that title. Right?
Yes.
So when we talk about ethnomusicology, right, we're talking about the interaction of music, culture, and society, right, and how music sort of manifests certain realities, and how music manifests social change, right? So that's going to be kind of like the umbrella under which we're having this discussion today. But let's begin, and Dr. Osterman, I'm gonna begin with you. Let's begin by just having you make some statements about, what is the importance of music in general in terms of everyday life? What do you see as the functions of music?
Well, I have given music a definition. And I say that music is a living organism that creates and influences feelings, ideas, emotions, moods, and behaviors in individuals. And from the individual comes community. And as we look at music, even from antiquity, it has always been an integral part of the human being and the community. And so it is totally important to know and understand how music works within a particular community. And we have all kinds of communities, you know, people groups all over the world. But in specifically talking about the African American experience, we have a rich heritage that goes back to Africa, crosses the waters, and starts a brand new language here in America. And over time, it has morphed into what we see and experience today.
Okay.
That's
Thank
my introduction.
Dr. Brinson, how would you respond to that question? What is the importance of music in everyday life, and what do you see as the functions of music?
It's a language, and music works a lot better than just words. Words are great, but it doesn't have the ethos, the pathos that it has, because just the physics of music, it affects you physically, mentally, spiritually, your whole soul. So it's a communication tool, and it can be used to express things sometime when words can't. When you can't get a word out, you can moan and groan.
Mm-hmm.
Sometime when you can't moan and groan, you can just be silent. And in your silence, you're conveying a thought. It's an instrument by which we can communicate the innermost parts of our being. And if society around us affects us, we use and have used and can continue to use that mechanism to express or to communicate with whomever we choose.
Okay. Mr. Lundy, how would you respond to that question about the importance of music and the functions of music?
For me, is life force. Life force, life energy. Music is life. Music
Curtis, did we lose you, or are you in thought?
We may have.
Okay, we may have lost him for a minute. He might have to come back.
Froze, huh?
Right, but let's continue on. So, and it's interesting that both of you talk about community, and
that
how,
would be the beginning of music.
okay,
Yeah.
go
As
ahead.
well.
There you go.
So
Curtis, say that
music,
again, because you fell out there. We didn't hear all of that. So start again, man.
I said that music is life force.
Yeah.
Music is what makes us be able to be who we are. Without music, you take music away from society, and the society itself will perish. There's every instance in every part of history where there is no absence of music. Music, as I said, because civilization began in Africa, that's where music began as well. And the connection with us as a diaspora to music is intertwined in every way. So I really agree with everything that Dr. Osterman and I'm sorry, brother, to not pronounce your name properly. Can you say it one more time?
Hezekiah Brinson. You can just call me Brinson.
Yeah, Brother Brinson.
Or Dr. B, most people call me.
Okay, Brother Brinson, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with both of you. And I just add to that just to say that, you know, it affects us in so many ways that we that we are even unconscious of sometimes. However, the life force that music creates and allows us to be in tune with nature, as it were, is something that is a phenomenon that is still being explored. And that's who we are. We're the scientists who explore that.
Okay. Now, one of the things that, you guys mentioned is the importance of music in terms of just providing a community, providing a way for people to express themselves. And especially if we look at the movement, right, and the music that was part of the movement. I was reading a piece by Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan, right, who, of course, was with Honey in the Rock and with, the Freedom Singers and several other groups. And she was talking about how music, in terms of the movement, kind of inspired people in the movement and not only inspired them, but sometimes calmed them down when they were facing a situation in which there was danger. They would start singing, right? And this was a way to, kind of keep people engaged. And she called them freedom songs, right? And many of these freedom songs were gospel songs, right? Religious songs. Many of them, were adapted to the movement and the particular situation. And in fact, Dr. Reagan talked about how, when people would go to jail, they would sing. While they were in jail, they would sing, right? And this calmed them down, and it angered the prison guards because, they didn't like this, but it calmed people down. So if we look at these songs, right, and Dr. Reagan also called them, not only freedom songs, but she called them congregational songs, because they were songs that, everybody could kind of join in. And so if we look at music from that point of view, what would you say would be some of the most, I don't know if you want to say important songs that the people in the movement, kind of listen to, but what would be some of the songs that you would think or that were part of sort of what we call these freedom songs? Dr. Osterman?
Could you repeat that question one more time?
Well, I would say, what would be, if we talk about these freedom songs, what would be some of the songs that would be part of this repertoire? What were some of the songs that the people in the movement, used to inspire them or calm them down?
Oh, yes, well, two come to mind right off the bat, especially during the civil rights era. We Shall Overcome, that was like the theme song. Don't you let nobody turn you around.
There you go.
Keep on a talking. And there are songs like that people used to help them make it over. And we can even draw from antiquity. When sometimes when Israelites were going to battle, they would always have, well, not all the time, but at some times there are stories that tell of them having singers precede them going to war to help encourage them. And so this is nothing new. Music is a powerful tool that can convey message, create unity, camaraderie, community, all of those things. So those two songs in particular come to mind.
Yeah. Dr. Brinson, and not only did, those songs, I guess sort of more religious songs, but also secular music. And in some instances, in fact, they even would take religious songs and change the lyrics, right? I read about how they would take Ray Charles's song, Hit the Road, Jack, and they changed the lyrics to Get Your Rights, Jack, and they sang it to the, to the melody of that tune. So, and there were several others as well. And so they took Ray Charles's What I Say. In fact, I read about how the Spelman College students took the song Ray Charles, What I Say, and turned it into, the AM, they called it the A&P song, Sit-In Showdown. So you know, definitely these songs had an impact. So Dr. Brinson, if we look at that, what would you say then, you know, let me see how I can say that. So does music, does it always have to be, I don't know, I guess we call them battle songs, as Dr. Osterman said, you know, they would have these songs when they were going into battle. And some, you know, in the civil rights movement, there were some battle songs, I guess, when they were marching and they know they were going to confront the police and they know they were going to front this danger, they would sing these songs. But there also were songs that were, you know, more celebratory as well. So if we look at the impact of music, then Dr. Brinson, what would you say then is the most important thing in terms of how music brings people together?
So I'm going to try to answer all that, but I want to piggyback off what my good friend Dr. Eurydice was saying. Y'all, biblically, the Levitical priesthood was a bunch of musicians. You had horn players, you had singers, hundreds of players. I don't know if you know of the story when David was taking the Ark of Covenant from one place to another. A man, Uzzah, went to touch the ark and he fell dead. And he fell dead, not because he was trapped, but he was out of order because the assignment was given to the Levitical priesthood, who were musicians. Now, if you look in that chapter, I think it's 1 Corinthians 15, 13 chapter, one of those chapters, don't quote me too much on that. But it says that the musicians were supposed to be placed as singers and the horn players. When they did it right, the next time the ark proceeded and they were dancing and everything. But yes, music can serve as a vaccination. As we're going through this COVID time, we're given a vaccination to fight off a disease. When we have problems in our community, we can use music to shield us from just destroying ourselves and hurt, shield us from getting too excited and tear up things. Music can calm us down, but it can lift us up. It can make us be excited. That's why I say music has the properties that just spoken words doesn't have. You were mentioning some individuals who took music, the staple singers. The staple singers, when Dr. King heard them sing, he said, listen, I think you all would be good to be in this movement. And Pop Staples went back and talked to his daughter, and they began to take up the mantle and start writing songs that they borrowed from wherever they were. They didn't know if they were secular songs or anything. They met the need for the moment because that was the vaccination they needed. They needed that for whatever it was. The words of Dr. King is powerful, but the words without "we shall overcome," I don't know if we would have made it. Now, just for instance, the melody of, I did a little research, y'all, forgive me, but actually the melody and some of the words from that hymn that Charles Tindley penned came from a Eurocentric word song that Sanctinius, and that word in Latin meant no more auction block for me. Part of the "we shall overcome" words were at first, till we readapted them, was "I'll overcome someday," as a hymn Charles Tindley wrote. And then "I'll overcome someday," and at the last it would say, "no more auction block for me." We changed those words to "we shall overcome" instead of "I shall overcome." And we made it adaptable to the situations in which we were in during the civil rights struggle. That's just one song, but many songs were taken from everywhere. I mean, Boy also had songs. I mean, I can go down the road. I'm gonna give you a few of them. "Old Freedom," Shirley Verrett, She went to my church, sang that song and made it very possible because she was in that struggle too. Uh, Go Tell It on a Mountain. In some cases, it was code songs, even in the civil rights movement that were borrowed from slave songs. We gave code. People get ready. The train are coming. I didn't think of that song as just a secular. It met the moment. So when Curtis Mayfield and the Empiricals were singing that song, and now you're saying, because we sing that song when we go on tour in Europe, people get ready still to this day. And it has a duality in meaning because it's meeting the needs of that time. I can go on. There are many other songs. The Alabama song, you know, A Change Is Gonna Come. I mean, even with Oh Happy Days, you know, that the Hawkins did. Music can serve many purposes. It always has done it. I think it was created that way. Somebody said that there isn't life without music. And I have to agree with that because the beat of a heart, if that heart stops, you have no life.
Yeah.
And that's what we call music. We beats with beats with beats.
Let me go ahead and finish your verse. Don't need no ticket, just get on board, right?
Right.
You know, I'd like to just add something to what you were just saying, how songs can just bring people together. I call Amazing Grace
Amen.
the American tragedy song. Because whenever there is anything that is tragic that takes place and people gather candlelight, the first song they sing is Amazing Grace. Across the board, everybody starts with Amazing Grace. And so that just shows how powerful music is in bringing people together, conveying a message, feelings, all these things.
Now, and we're talking about, you know, how music inspired those who were part of the movement, right? But also the movement inspired and had an impact on the national culture, right? And not just, you know, the national culture, but Black culture, you know, as well. And so, and music culture in general. So Mr. Lundy, if we talk about the impact of these songs, this music, and the civil rights movement on popular music, what would you say would be the impact?
Well, I would go all the way back to use the phrase popular music. I would go all the way back to the influence of, I feel like one of the first civil rights songs, Strange Fruit. And another one that I would bring to mind in terms of people in the music that I aspire to play and be a part of in the jazz world, Louis Armstrong's, you know, Black and Blue. Those two songs kind of made America think. So we're talking about, and you know, that's I'm going back to the life force, you know, as how I describe the music. And you know, just the consciousness of America that was brought to bear from those two songs really started a whole different way of really acknowledging, you know, what we were going through as a people emotionally. And I talk about something sometimes among my peers and among even family members that I don't think that we have ever and still are not addressing. And I simply call it post-traumatic slavery disorder. And I would say that through the therapy of the music, we've been able to deal with that as a people. However, the effects that it has had on us and still does have on us to this day is sometimes gut-wrenching. And it's so entrenched until we kind of don't even address it. So once again, and to touch on what Dr. Brinson was talking about in terms of going down, you know, and talking about the biblical connotations of how the music was in an effectual way there as well. One of the songs that people don't talk about that much with the movement is "Go Down Moses," and because it talks about being free, and that's the part of the civil rights movement that I think people really sometimes kind of like look past too. We still were fighting for our freedoms, you know, 60, 70, 80, almost 100 years after slavery. So we really need to take stock in not just how this music has affected us and how it's continuing to affect us now. And all of a sudden now there's been this popularity in looking into our history as we look, you know, at what's going on in America today. And still, you look at the absence of the awards that we used to garner at the Grammys, the categories that are not even there anymore for the Black music diaspora, gone. The rules that have been made and changed so that our music, even though it's put on Front Street, has still been minimized. And what do I mean by that? I could get into it, but I'm not going to go that far into it. But just to talk about calming, if we all remember, you know, what James Brown did in Boston when there was certainly going to be a riot there. And he was asked not to perform, and he did, and he was able to calm what certainly would have been some serious problems there. So music, as I said, is the life force, and it's what has brought us through the struggles. Without the music, I don't know if we would have made it. And what's the other one? How I Got Over?
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, and if we talk about, I kind of want to go back to this again about the impact of the, you know, these songs, this music, and the civil rights movement. There are those who say that it changed the national music culture in the sense that popular music began to embrace some of the issues that were raised by these songs, particularly, you know, issues about justice and equality and those kinds of things. And that, you know, you would start to see the impact on, you know, the popular artists that we talked about, but even white artists, you know, folk singers began to embrace some of these issues raised by the civil rights movement. People like Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, you know, right. Pete Seeger, people like that.
Yeah, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind.
Yeah. So you know, it did, you know, it did impact the larger culture, right, and music culture, and it did lead to, and you know, I can remember, you know, in the 60s, 67, 68, you know, how the groups like the Temptations started singing socially conscious songs. You know, I mean, you were still dancing to them, right? But they started being socially conscious, and they started raising certain kinds of issues, you know, about things that we as a people were facing. So, you know, I think it did change, you know, sort of the national music culture. It did lead to people, artists beginning to incorporate some of these ideas. But I would like to know how, you know, when the movement moved out of the South, you know, initially the movement was about the South, right? And at some point, right, it moved out of the South into urban communities, northern urban communities, right? And I'm sure all you guys know that story about Dr. King trying to go into Cicero, Illinois, right? And he said it was worse than any Southern town that he had ever been in, right? And so when the movement started moving into urban areas and urban Black communities, how did that change the language of the music, and how did that change the language of organizing? Dr. Brinson, what would you say to that? All right, so as the movement moves north and into urban areas, how does that impact the music that comes out of the movement?
Well, as music began to progress, not music, I meant to say, as the movement began to progress, and remember, there was some things made. I mean, during Dr. King's time, we were afforded the opportunity to stop riding on the back of the bus. But Dr. King didn't want to stop there. His movement changed from a civil rights to human rights. And all over the world, poverty exists, but specifically in America at that time, we were dealing with a Vietnam War, which probably cost him his life, because he starts speaking on that. And James, you mentioned James, everybody know the song, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, but I want to take the first part of that. Say it loud. Not just you're Black and I'm proud, but whatever is ailing you, say it loud. That's why we say today, names, call his name. So things were happening in the North as well as in the South. Dr. King said, when he went to the North, there was a different type of racism, not overt, not that you could see so many times, but it was embedded in systemic racism practices and laws and housing and food and equalities and what you make. And so music began to reflect these injustices because the human rights were now brought to the forefront, as James would have said, say it loud. And Dr. King helped bring those things. Remember, civil rights were the Southern problem mostly, but when he began to become more national, it became human rights. Dr. King was effective, very effective. Andrew Young, Dr. King. As a matter of fact, I knew Andrew Young's mother. We call her Daisy Young. And I could tell you some stories about that, but that's another time for another place. I might be telling my age. I'm still young. But moving towards the North, pop songs began to take it real. And I believe that this was where some of our rap started coming from. I think the movement continued throughout that because they began to say it loud, some of the injustices that have been done. And I agree with my brother who pointed out Strange Fruit, because when Billie Holiday was singing about strange trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood on the roots, Black bodies swinging from southern breeze and strange fruit hanging from poplar tree. Yes. That struck a nerve. And sometimes we need to use what's at our hands. Even when we don't have a drum to play on, you create one with a garbage can. Dr. King taught us how to pull up our boots, even though we don't have boots to pull up from. Even though it's cruel, we have to say it loud. So during the northern part, the same issues pervaded the whole country, not just civil rights, but human rights, of poverty, of mistreatment, of equal equity. We have to say it loud. And I think we still have to do that today.
Well, Dr. Osterman, I wanted to add, did you want to respond to that question?
Well, I was going to add a little bit to the tail end of that and say how not only did it start to bleed, the secular and the church music started reflecting the same ideas in the music. And there seemed to be a blending, no matter where you were. If you were in the church, you were going to hear it. And it's interesting that the sound of the music now began to sound the same inside of the church as well as outside of the church. So it was easy to hear all the time. And we had at our disposal the airwaves. So you were getting it over the airwaves through radio, CDs, et cetera, and the blending now, the same message inside of the church as well as outside of the church.
So when we talk about these songs as songs that, you know, sort of capture the culture, right? Yes. And I think it's important that we kind of go back in terms of the music and the movement, is that these songs, especially the songs that were part of the movement. Now, you know, we kind of gotten off a little bit talking about how that impacted others, but just in terms of within the movement, those songs, it's important to understand that those songs were songs that were already new, right? I mean, that was part of their culture, part of their community. It wasn't like people just went out and wrote these songs for the movement. These were songs that they had been using, right, throughout history and throughout their culture. And you know, singing these songs gave people a chance to kind of add their voice to this, right? And it helped you to kind of go beyond just being an individual. Now you were part of this mass, right? And so if you went to a community, in a specific community, you could find out things about the community through the songs that they sang, right? And that kind of thing. So if we look at the impact of the movement, right, in terms of music and the movement, would you say that these songs, you know, they do capture the culture, right? And they did have an impact in the sense that, as I mentioned, you know, earlier, when people went to jail and they started singing, the guards, you know, didn't know what to make of this, right? Because I mean, here was this sound coming out of these people who they thought they were oppressing and holding down, but the songs weren't expressing that, right? I mean, you know, and so the guards didn't know what to do.
Exactly.
You know, with these people, you know, in this sense. So, you know, if we kind of go back to that idea that these songs were a way of giving people the courage to face what they had to face, right? Because, you know, now when we kind of, people think, you know, time has passed and people don't really understand the danger that, especially in the South, the danger that these people were in doing this, right? And I think it's also important to point out that even though these songs, you know, they're mainly religious songs, they're not passive songs, right? And those who want to look at the movement and the music that comes out of that as just kind of, when people think about people singing "We Shall Overcome," they just think of people just being passive, you know.
Well, can I interject something, Douglas?
Yeah, go ahead, Curtis.
That's the powerful tool of the music, because in the way, it's almost a psychological advantage that the music gives the person that's emoting in that, because it's almost like you said, the jailer is saying to himself, I thought these people were supposed to be unhappy and downtrodden, and they're singing. So the emotional and psychological effect that the music had in that way is once again sometimes minimized. It's the once again the force of the music. You know, so you're right on, spot on in terms of what you're saying in terms of how the music had an effectual effect on the adversary, for the lack of a better term.
Let me see if I can set something up for you. You know, I'm a po' boy. I'm actually from Mississippi. We moved to New Orleans when I was very young. And my mother was, I used to say, a domestic engineer. She was a maid. And my dad was a longshoreman. But, you know, I come from a big family. You know, there were 10 of us in the house. And many times my mother would come home and there wasn't a lot of food to feed. I've seen my mother go in the kitchen, put some flour and water together, make biscuits like you've never had before, and put some sugar and water, and it becomes syrup, just the right thing, and then put some margarine and you had a meal. She took what she had because we were hungry, and she took what we had. So when communities and when societies are hungry and they're going through pain, we don't care what genre it comes from. We take what we have and we utilize it. And we've always been like that as a people. Whether we put the categories of a secular and popular. The staple singer, Vera Steak, she didn't know whether it was a pop or she sang a song with a message. And so those songs that were done, wherever it came from, it met the need.
Yeah.
When our bellies are hungry, when we are fighting, when we're hurting, we're going to use the tools that are before us. And the genius is God has put something in us, and we call that music so that we can communicate. There you go. Communicate our suffering and how we can get relief and our celebration, because there were some celebratory songs as well.
Yeah.
So that's what somebody else, I don't want to take up on it.
When you said celebratory songs, that made me think of that song, and it's been a long time since I've been to church, so I'm gonna confess that now, but I grew up going to church.
Let me help you, brother. Church ain't in just a building. Life is church, okay?
Yeah.
It's just not
Yeah.
a building.
But I, my grandmother made sure that I went to church when I was growing up, and
The building.
and I remember that song. They would always sing at the end of the service, "What a fellowship, what a joy divine." That's an example of a celebratory song, right?
Yeah, and also "Oh Happy Day."
Yeah.
Oh Happy Day is a celebratory song.
Yeah.
That song, as I travel in Europe, that's one of, Amazing Grace and Oh Happy Day. In Europe, they still singing Oh Happy Day. Now, the Hawkins family wrote that so many years ago. I mean, not wrote it, rearranged it, because it was a hymn, like We Shall Overcome. It came from the church. Yeah. But it was about celebrating because we had gotten over a number of steps. So yeah, you did have also celebratory songs as well. Music served that purpose. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say also, piggyback on a little thing of what you said, how resilient we are as a people. And when we came to this country initially, and we had the use of our drums, that was a primary communication tool. And then when they were taken away from us,
thank you,
we learned to make percussion instruments via the body. We learned how to clap. We learned how to tap on our thighs to create. We learned how to stomp our feet. We created our own percussion instruments. And so that also speaks to the resilience. God put something in us that would not die. And it would always come out through song.
And just to kind of go back again, when we talked about the impact of these songs and how they would unnerve our adversaries, I was reading a story about a guy was saying he was part of the movement, and they were in a march somewhere, and the policeman was beating him, and he just started singing "We Shall Overcome," and he said all of a sudden the policeman it's like he couldn't hit him anymore for some, now. Granted, that was just one example, because the other policemen who would just keep beating, until you couldn't sing no more. But he said he was really, he was shocked at the power of that song. He just started singing it, and the policeman just stopped and kind of backed away from him. So, these songs have power. They had power, right? And so when we talk about, you know, I don't want to leave the civil rights movement yet. So when we talk about the civil rights movement, and then as young people start to become a part of the movement, right? And the movement, in a sense, starts to get younger in terms of the leaders and that kind of thing, right? And then you start to see how young people would take songs from popular music, songs that were, you know, popular at that time, and then use them as freedom songs, right? So the younger people brought new songs into the movement, right? Songs that also began to be used as freedom songs. And as we mentioned, Ray Charles, you know, many of his songs were used by these younger people, and you know, I guess to put their own stamp on the movement. And so, and many would say that this is kind of what led to what we call soul music, you know, what we call soul music, blending the secular and the sacred, right? And making, I mean, Ray Charles was at the forefront of that, right? And people, church people are still mad at Ray Charles for that, right? And when you think about it, you know, I'm sure most of you saw the, you know, the Aretha series, and how she kind of had to battle with the church people over this secular and sacred thing, right? And you know, she chose to go, you know, with the secular, although she always had that sacred thing in her voice because that's who she was. But you know, the younger people would bring new songs into the movement, right? And then we talked about national performers who would also have an impact. Dr. Brinson, you mentioned the staple singers, but you can talk about Harry Belafonte, you know, was one of those who was very, Mahalia Jackson, and the freedom singers, Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan. She was part of the group called the Freedom Singers, right? In the city.
Mahalia, I was waiting. I didn't want to do it all at once.
No, yeah, we're gonna talk about, we got to talk about Mahalia, right?
Well, I want to interject once again.
Go ahead, Carter.
You know, the whole notion about separating us musically, that's, first of all, I take issue with that, because it's all our music.
Yeah.
So, you know, we don't need to separate it among ourselves and divide and conquer among ourselves. All of the music is ours. It's all from us. So, you know, for us to be fighting among each other that you shouldn't sing this or you shouldn't sing that, it's all inspired by the Creator. That's really the bottom line, you know?
Yeah.
We're all, as musicians and instruments of the science of music and moving molecules and doing all the things that music does, we're all inspired by the Creator.
Yeah, yeah.
And because of that, you know, the music that emanates from us as artists, because see, there's two levels of musicians. There's musicians and then there's artists. Okay? And if you look at what's going on in today's society, the people that have taken up the mantle that we as musicians used to take up in terms of being socially conscious and making the world aware, athletes have picked up that mantle now. They've been given, as it were, the microphone to speak on these things. But once again, we as musicians need to take our place and need to be responsible, you know, in every genre of this music. Because like I said, once again, I try not to separate our music. You know, it's all Black music, you know, and we don't need to have somebody else. You know, we've lost a lot of our culture behind letting people separate us and and trying to separate ourselves sometimes. So, you know, do I agree with everything that comes across the airwaves musically? Maybe not, but I still believe in freedom, you know, and we as a people, once again, need to stop fighting among ourselves, even musically, and embrace one another, because we all have something to give and something to share to the big picture here.
Yeah.
You know, and we are as Little Richard used to say, an Oakwood alumni, I might add. He was the architect, of what they call rock and roll. And when everybody wants to do the research, they say, well, yeah, I guess he's right. But guess what? In that same way, this music that is so powerful that we are a part of is the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It is the movement. We talked about some of the other different, contributions that other musicians have made, and the Temptations and people like that, and Sweet Honey and the Rock and the Freedom Singers. But let's talk about Fables and Faubles.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. I'm not gonna neglect that. We're gonna get there, Curtis.
Okay.
Oh, I wanted to first say hello, everybody.
Hello.
Oh,
And I wanted to say a couple things before I forget. When I came in, you mentioned about the power of the music. And one thing I was looking at this whole, historically, you talk about, there's this conversation with Malcolm X and MLK, like Malcolm is more militant, but if you look at the word militant, the definition, and then you look what King did, what's more militant is than to stand your ground with a man with a gun versus go get a gun and try to defend yourself. It's much more militant to sit there and say, I'm not gonna let you change me no matter what. You can get a gun or whatever else. And that's kind of the spirit of it. And then in terms of just the, in my perspective, civil rights, when I first hear about civil rights, I was born in '68. I get a negative feeling about civil rights. Being from Alabama, I had this negative feeling about King even, because it was so much talked about King as this mythical figure. And growing up, I'm like, he was the only one. And so as I progress in my maturity and education, and what I learned from it more is it's the spiritual aspects and the education aspects. And I give an example what Curtis was talking about with the jazz and the divisions. Curtis right, it doesn't matter, but I was reading where Cornell University has the largest archives of hip hop music. Rutgers University has the largest archives of jazz music.
There you go.
Indiana University arguably has one of the large archives of Black music. So either way, and then the ad and talk to a lot of the older musicians, that they never use the word jazz to describe their music. They just say Black music. And especially the Southern musicians, the way that they came up, in particular older ones, they just played. If it was jazz over here for this group, they played it. If it was for a wedding, they played that.
Yeah.
And I think our young people,
I'll zoom in right now, okay?
I think our young people are missing out, because if you say jazz, they thinking whatever they thinking, but it's not hip hop. And then people who like gospel, they say, okay, that's not our music. But I think we have to really do our history and own our music, because we've given the world trillions of dollars of economic infrastructure based on what these Black people did back in the South.
Yeah, yeah.
And we run away from it. Like, okay, that's, we need to do some important stuff. And then dealing with the HBCUs and talking to a lot of the HBCU musicians, that they didn't start jazz programs with all the Alabama State Collegians, Tennessee State Collegians, Wilberforce,
Right.
all these great musicians and these Black bands. They didn't have no jazz programs.
But hold on, Douglas. I'll say that. Y'all partner, we talking about something else now. You talking about the music business.
No, but I'm just saying how it connects to the fact we don't own our history.
Yeah.
And you saying Yeah.
And
Go
I
ahead.
think
Go ahead.
that's
Let,
what,
let-
that's
let
kind of
me,
what Curtis was saying in terms of, not trying to cause divisions, right? In terms of
Mhm.
Black music and what's Black music and what's not, and what's hip and what's not hip, right? And although Curtis, I would say that I'm sure you're not averse to being described as a jazz musician, right? As someone who plays jazz, but you wouldn't necessarily make the argument that that's the only kind of music that people should hear, right?
Right. Well, I mean, we don't have to go that far to look into where I'm at with that, with Jesus Walk, So, music is, as you said, is necessary for where you are, the environment that you're in, and what you need it to be for that moment.
Yeah.
And that's why I said, we are, as Reggie Workman put it, I think he says, music scientists, or we're scientists, sound scientists. So
Yeah.
we create sound that affects people, and that's a very, first of all, that can, if you really take, it's really a responsibility, and so the people who do take it seriously, like, and it affects how and why they compose, like Dr. Osterman, and really realize that the effect that they can have on someone by putting notes together in a certain way that make sound in a way that it's never been made before. Because see, that's the beauty of music, it's fresh and new every time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of like what we want out of life. We want life to live and be vibrant and to be new and fresh every day.
Yeah.
And as a people, still feeling like we're, as I said, dealing with post-traumatic slavery disorder, once again, as the brother adequately put it, and we still don't own our own. So, that's a whole nother discussion about how the movement came out of segregation, which in some ways, see, I grew up in segregation, and I saw how much it kept us unified in some ways. So that was a struggle for me to say, well, okay, and to witness, being the first time that I went to school with white people, and to witness, how in some ways it wasn't as good,
I'm jealous, actually.
Yeah,
I wish I experienced that.
Yeah, well, I was able to experience that, and it affected me musically as well. So there are so many different aspects of what we're talking about in this dialogue that because initially I asked Howard, okay, we're supposed to be doing this for an hour, and of course he charlataned me and said, oh yeah, it's going to be an hour, which I knew it was, So I said, there's no way in the world you can get Dr. Osterman, myself, and anybody from New Orleans, and they only going to talk about an hour when it comes to music. So, but that being said,
yeah,
the freedom riders, yeah, that's the whole thing right there, the music.
Yeah.
The music.
I wanted to jump in too, but I think Eurydice wanted to jump in first. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to piggyback on something that Cydale Smith said. And it speaks to, he spoke about the different collections at the various schools. And I find that as a people group, we are tremendous inventors, but we don't develop. And when we come up with something, then after a while we let it go and we're on to something else. And we're not necessarily reaching back to show the present generation what went on in the previous generations. We don't roll over our information. So I shudder to think about how many people, young people today, really know details about the civil rights movement, because the same principle behind what started the Fisk Jubilee singles, the very music that helped them to survive, was the very thing that they were trying to get away from the memory of. They were trying to get away from the memory of the slave songs and why they sang those songs. And yet that was the very thing that helped to sustain them at Fisk University. And so I think along the way, when we were making progress during the civil rights movement, once a lot of those goals had been achieved, and the ensuing generations came forth, we forgot the struggle. We forgot various aspects of what it took to get where we are today. And so we don't really remember. We don't really remember. We don't teach our generation, present and future generations where we came from. And so I think that is something that can really create division, because as a people, then we only know what is current. We cannot reach back and embrace our heritage. Just like as I said, the Fisk singles, they didn't want to reach back, but that's the very thing that has kept hope alive today.
Dr. Brinson, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off that and try to address a little of what Cy said in a few minutes. I agree with you. However, I have seen a ray of hope. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of our young people. And some of our young people are educating themselves about our history. I believe what happened after George Floyd's gruesome murder, and Black people, white people, all people marching together, reached back and start looking at some of those elements that caused change and start to re-educate themselves. Well, we may have fallen short. They're educating themselves. And I've had the opportunity to talk to a number of young people, and I am encouraged. Remember, Dr. King wasn't really old. And all those civil rights, they were younger people, young adults, younger people. And remember, those dogs and those hose pipe were sick. They sucked those dogs on young people, young teenage people. That was young people in that struggle. There are young people in the struggles today. So I'm not discouraged. I'm encouraged. And every time I get a chance to work with some young people, I tell them, this generation, I was first concerned because I didn't see the growth. But now I'm encouraged with YouTube, with different, and they're being creative in their own ways. Some things are way out there, but they're embracing the struggle and they're utilizing the things that are at their hands. like we were utilizing the things that were at our hands. I heard someone said it was black or white. Man, we weren't thinking about that. We were hurting. And one of the reasons why some white people, not all, wasn't invested as much because it didn't affect them the same way it affected us. Mm-hmm. So when we went to our church, we used what we had. Those are the songs we had. The white folk didn't do those songs because they didn't have the same struggle. You know, I lived a little bit too, and I remember looking in books, and when we got books, you see certain names, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 names from other people, from other schools. These were the books that they were giving us after 3 and 4 years in white schools. We were getting them in black schools. Yeah. I'm beginning to tell my age again. But certain struggles they just didn't have, so they couldn't identify, but they did appreciate. And those who are marching shoulder by shoulders in Black Lives Matter movements today, they don't understand truly what we go through, but they have an appreciation, they have an apathy. And when we begin to pull the elements that can tell the cries through music, it doesn't matter which side. I heard my brother Cy said is more militant to be said. I agree with that. It took both. It took both. History is history. We can't change history. We can't change. It took both. Mm-hmm. And both of them are equally as important in my sight. I'm not going to diminish Malcolm X and raise King, and I'm not going to diminish Dr. King and raise Malcolm X when they both were effective during the times in which they lived. But one of the unifying factors is that we did have an outlet to calm and to excite. And we go back to music and its genres. They didn't have names in. And last thing, and I'm gonna stop. You mentioned jazz, and I'm from New Orleans here, and no offense, I know St. Louis and upper states trying to take it away, but those ships came to the mouth of the Mississippi. They came from Ireland, they came from Africa, they came from different places, and they met right down there. We call the French Quarters today. And musicians used to get together at what most people know as Bourbon Street. There were other streets too, and got together in places like Vul Corral and eat at those places and shared the instruments they had. They shared literally instrument, they shared the knowledge about instrument, they shared the music, and they amalgamated into something we call jazz now. Actually, the civil rights movement is kind of a jazz. We utilize different things to express how we feel. That's how the blues were made, an amalgamation of cultures. And that's enough, that's enough.
I will. And I want to acknowledge a couple of individuals who have joined us, Mr. Cydale Smith and Mr. Tyrone Burton. I'd like to welcome you guys to the discussion. But now I want to kind of move into the second part. And the second part of the discussion has to do with the impact of the movement on the artists, right? We kind of talked about how music within the movement was used by people in the movement, right, to express how they felt, to deal with certain situations. But now I kind of want to look at the impact of the movement on artists, particularly jazz musicians. We talked a little bit about this already, but I really want to get into how it impacted jazz musicians. And when we talk about music, and I think Dr. Osterman mentioned this at the very beginning, you know, music has always sort of been part of our culture, you know, from slave time, emancipation, right? The civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, there was always music. And so, you know, there's a connection between music and politics, and music has been a way for artists, and particularly African-American artists, right, to express feelings of struggle, right? I mean, you know, artists are being impacted by this too. And so when we talk about particularly jazz musicians, and you know, as I mentioned to you, Mr. Lundy, we were going to come to this, you know, we can kind of look at how, you know, the movement impacted jazz musicians who then use their talents to show, you know, and to compose songs that show how the environment was affecting them, right? So you get things like Mingus's, you know, Fables of Faubus. You know, you get Art Blakey's, you know, the Freedom Rider or the Core, right? Or you get Max
Right.
Roach's Freedom Now Suite, you get Sonny Rollins' tune, Freedom, right? You get John Coltrane's Alabama and Africa. So Curtis, tell me a little bit about, as a jazz musician, how do you use music to express what you're feeling?
Well, it's a prayer. Every time I play, it's in a way I'm playing and I'm praying. I'm praying for the strength to continue to say what I can't say all the time verbally. And what that is to never forget. You know, it's funny. We're always the ones who are told, oh, that was then and this and all these other reasons to forget about our history and their history, because that word is just what it is, his story. So I'm telling my story every time I play. I want to talk about our story, and I don't want to forget, and I don't want to be forgotten. And so in that way, that's the way that I approach what I try to do musically and what I try to say musically. And in the same way, I have gotten that from the people who came before me that expressed this in the music, like Coach, like Sonny Rollins, like Art Blakey. In spite of everything that was going on, to keep them down and to subjugate them, if you will, you know, we were used as ambassadors anytime in any type of conflicts and world conflict. Jazz was sent as world statesmen. Dizzy Gillespie even recorded a record called World Statesman, where they were touring the Middle East, all of the ports that now are under siege, you know, Iran, Iraq. Art Blakey used to, you know, talk about being in those places, and you know, A Night in Tunisia was written on a garbage can top in Tunisia. You know, so you know, the world of jazz, as I said before, is a freedom music. It is a music that expresses civil rights, human rights. And so for us as musicians to express ourselves in the way that we need to make some type of a statement about how we feel about what's going on socially and economically. Because see, that's the other point that we miss when we talk about this music. And I always had a saying, and still do, follow the money and you'll see where the music is. We talk about New Orleans, and there's, you know, of course, we know the history of New Orleans, but let's not forget about Oklahoma. Let's not forget about Oklahoma. You know, where you look at another part of the world, another part of America, and a thriving economic scene, and also a thriving music scene. So that created that jealousy, that created the whole, you know, we know about, you know, what happened in Tulsa. So once again, here we are taught to, oh, just once again, turn the other cheek, be, you know, not passive, but just be the forgiving ones. And I'm just, I'm tired of that. You know, I'm tired of having that position, even musically. Yeah. You know, it's time for us to take back what belongs to us.
Yeah. And you know, Chris, I think
even with the awards, excuse me?
I'm sorry, man, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And even with the award shows, the awards, we need to give ourselves awards. That's right. We don't need to wait for people to give us our awards, you know? So I'm.
Okay, it seemed like we lost him there for a minute. But I think it's important, especially when we talk about, you know, jazz musicians and you know, those of you who are involved in music can chime in. But when I think about jazz musicians, you know, people often get enamored with the technique of musicians, jazz musicians, because to me,
The music that Art Blakey, Holiday, because to me, she set stage, you know?
all right,
And, you know, once again, we have to promote one another. We have to talk about one another. We have to hold our own torch and blow our own trumpet, because nobody's going to blow it for us, you know? And I don't want to wait for somebody to give me something. That's another going back to James again. Open up the door.
Oh, I get it myself.
Yeah,
There you go.
I'll get it myself.
There you go.
Yeah,
Okay.
but Curtis, and I was saying, Curtis, you know, especially when we talk about the impact that the movement would have on jazz musicians, because once again, this is being sponsored by the Tennessee Valley Jazz Society, so you know that's one of our concerns. But when we talk about jazz musicians, I was saying people kind of get enamored with the technique that jazz musicians exhibit, right? To me, it's amazing, and that's one of the reasons why I love jazz. It's amazing to me. And that's why I respect the musicians so much, that you can just, you know, improvisation to me is just amazing, right? The whole idea of improvisation is amazing. And so a lot of times people sort of get hung up with that more so than what the musician is trying to say with his music, right? So, and so I think it's important to point out that jazz musicians are not just displaying technique, but they're also playing and they're writing music that reflects the political and social struggles that's happening around them, right? Jackie McLean said musicians play because of the world around them and what goes on, right?
Okay, so, Douglas,
yes.
I have to say this, you know, and I really never even really thought about it in this way, but I want to say this, that if I really am honest with myself, I believe that the whole advent of avant-garde and free jazz is a result of the movement.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and people have never really made that connection. But if you really think about it, as the music morphed and as the movement morphed and as the whole idea of freedom, we created and we morphed a whole different generation of musicians and music that just spoke to that purely. They tried to name it different things: free jazz, avant-garde, all of these different things. But you know, that's once again showed you the expression, as Dr. Osterman pointed out too, how we express ourselves by what we feel and what's going on within our communities at the time. So once again, piggybacking on what you had talked about before, about how when the music came north and some of the shackles that, as it were, that were shaken as the music came north, and the more freedom that was allowed to happen in the expression. So, and the people who embraced that, if you will, you know, because it was radical. And that's something that we have a problem sometime in knowing how to harness as a society. When something is different and totally strange, you know, as it were, you know, it becomes a vagary.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Curtis, because in fact, you know, there are many who connect the I guess sort of the advent of what you said called avant-garde jazz, or you know, the new thing. They called it the new thing, or however they refer to it, right? That it came out of this Black nationalism that many of these musicians were feeling. People like Archie Shepp and others who were angry, right? I mean, you know, people who expected change as a result of the civil rights movement and that change didn't happen, people were angry, right? And so there were you know, a group of musicians who expressed that anger through trying to revolutionize music, right? And at the same time, I guess, revolutionize society. So, you know, you know, I mentioned Archie Shepp, and there's several others as well, right?
Mhm.
So there is that connection between, right, this sort of rising Black nationalism and the impact it would have on musicians, and, you know, movements like the AACM, right?
Right. They didn't want to be told how to play and what
Right.
to play.
And the Black
You
Arts
see?
movement and several of those
There you go.
movements, right? This was a revolutionary kind of movement here, where people were trying to take the music, you know, beyond what it had been, but at the same time express what they were feeling about society.
Exactly.
Yeah, because when you hear Archie Shepp, you can't help but hear a brother who's angry.
Yeah, but you also hear the roots of church music.
Oh yeah,
and all of that.
Yeah.
So what it is an expression of the soul, and you know, that's I think once again what the freedom songs all over the board express is that you may be able to lock me up, you may be able to put chains on me, but you can't take my soul.
Mm-hmm.
And
you know, and we mentioned hip hop. I think a lot of the hip hop artists are expressing that. I mean, so you know, this struggle continues, and the way that it impacts musicians continues, and the response that musicians have to these things continues. So if you think of somebody like Kendrick Lamar, right, who now is kind of seen like as, you know, one of the voices of hip hop, and who's expressing this anger, who, you know, there's a whole group of younger people, African Americans, who are saying things haven't gotten any better, right? And we're still getting, you know, killed in the streets. We're still getting, you know, jailed disproportionately. We're still being treated unequally. And so you have a whole new generation of musicians, right? And some jazz musicians are part of that, but you have a whole new generation of musicians who are you know, expressing that through their music.
yes.
Yes. Okay. Now, is there anything, and we've almost used up our 2 hours. I couldn't believe that we would go 2 hours. Curtis didn't think we could do it in an hour. I didn't think we could go 2 hours, but you know, we're kind of at the point where we need to sort of start wrapping some things up. So I'm going to ask each of you, right, if you have something that you kind of want to make, so in terms of a concluding statement about the relationship between music, the civil rights movement, and the impact that it would have on musicians. Now is your chance to do that. So I'm gonna start with you, Dr. Osterman. Is there anything you would like to leave us with?
One thing when we were talking about, I'm sorry, my dog. One thing I was consider. Can you go to somebody else and let me get him out? I'm sorry. I need to let him out. I'll come back.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I need to let him out.
Go ahead, Dr. Brinson. Go ahead. Any closing statements you'd like to make?
I'm glad to see my good friend and Dr. Tyrone Burton, and who's a tremendous person who has wrote 2 books. He's in education, but he knows a lot about this as well. If he wants to say anything, I'll yield to him a few minutes. Dr. Burton, you want to say anything? He has 2 wonderful. He doesn't seem like
Dr.
you want
Burton,
to say
would you like to
anything.
add something to our discussion before we leave? You must be on mute.
Yeah.
You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Hi guys, thank you, Dr. Brinson, for inviting me. I just saw it, and glad to be among such an august group of fabulous musicians. I'm most humbled to be here, but you know, there would be no struggle, or the story would not be told correctly of our struggle without music. You know, it's woven into the fabric of our being as a people. You know, even when you go back to, you know, our roots in Africa, music is just part of what we do. And I think jazz is one of those different colors that shades how we've gone through the struggle and tells a different genre of the struggle that we've gone through. You know, each genre has its own flavor, but jazz is unique in that, you know, as you mentioned earlier, the improvisation piece It allows the individual to tell a story within a story. And that's often very important. And it's important that we continue to tell this truth, because this indeed is still speaking truth to power. You know, sometimes when words can't speak, a song will go a long way and will stay in the mind much longer than a word will. So it's important that we keep speaking this truth musically to power as long as we can, and that we pay it forward to those who come behind us, lest this genre die, because we are almost the last vestige of what great music, really great music, is and could be. So
Okay.
that's my parting word.
Dr. Brinson, you wanna add
And
something?
just to continue on, segue into that, remembering the past but paying it forward. I've had the opportunity of going to school at NOCA, that's New Orleans Center for Creative Arts, where Mr. Marcellus taught, and Wynton Marcellus attended, and Bradford Marcellus attended, and Harry Connick, I can go on.
Yeah.
But this is what happened when we were there, when it was first open. We were all students, but we had a chance. You know, people like Dizzy Gillespie, we knew, we not Louis Armstrong from a book, but from actual seeing and touching. I think what revitalized, I don't know if you knew this or not, but Wynton Marcellus was a tremendous classical trumpetist. And his dad did not force him to become a jazz musician. But I think when he saw different people, when Oscar Peterson would come to New Orleans, there at UNO, where NOCA actually started, and we had a chance to see firsthand these musicians and understand what these things were. Though we were young, we understood. And went and took it and revitalized, not him solely, but revitalized that jazz genre in many areas where it had died. If we can continue to teach our children, not just what they've been through, what our forefathers been through, what Dr. King been through, but what we go through, how we relate to that. My good friend Eurydice is writing right now. Pay it forward. Share that with us, younger people, and younger than that. And if we continue to do that, the story won't be lost. The struggle won't be lost. We are having cries right now. There's blood in the streets of so many Black men by police officers. We have to do something. No, we can't shoot them out. That's not the way. In Dr. King's, we'll never win. But there are tools at our disposal. Our voices can be heard,
Right.
and there can be change. There must be change if we're going to continue to grow and exist, because we'll all die as fools, also in the words of Dr. King, if we don't come together.
Osterman.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm sorry. One thing I wanted to say, and that is, as the living organism continues to pass through the annals of time, one of the things that I hope that we can get away from as we focus on how positive our music in the past has been, some of the hip hop music concerns me in the sense that the negative messages that are in them, you know, the negative references to women and other terrible things that go on in the music. That to me is a reflection of self-hate. And we need to go back and keep the positive alive as to how powerful we are, how powerful our music has been, how powerful our music will be. if we message positive things in this music. You know, right now, some of the hip hop is so negative, and that the tone of that sound just creates a negative feeling. Yeah. If we can change that and have a more positive message, talk about the positive things we have achieved, how we have overcome, how we are creators, and how we invent new styles that everybody else comes along and takes and develops and moves forward with. I think if we can get that message across, then that would be another source of power to empower the whole group of the people group, you know, because listening to the jazz era, that seems to be the out of the church, quote unquote, part of the movement. The message was channeled through that medium. We had the gospel in the church, the message was channeled in that medium. And so as we have all the different genres now, we need to be all saying this, presenting the same message with a different dialect. And I call the dialect the different genres.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, would you like to make some final comments?
Yes, sir. I'd like to, just, I'm thankful that I had a chance to share information with you guys and just kind of talk about something that I love. But I want to share a personal story that kind of culminates my perspective now. I was talking to Tommy Stewart, the trumpeter in Gaston, and he's 81, played with the Alabama State Collegians.
Who was supposed to be part of today's thing, but couldn't make it, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I was telling him I had scheduled to go up to Rutgers University back last summer before the COVID-19 pandemic and go spend a week there, doing research on jazz. So when I told him that this was last summer, he just kind of bust out laughing. And I'm like, well, okay, why is he laughing? And then he said, well, all your history right here. And then I found out that Joe Jones with the Alabama A&M, he spent time in Birmingham. He studied under these great musicians. If you look at Motown is, the foundation of it is in Alabama. The Temptations, out of the second group, 4 or 5 were from Alabama. Diana Ross, her family's from Alabama. The guy that did the dancing, the writers, they're from Alabama. Some of the Funk Brothers, one of them was from Alabama. I'm saying that to say the economic, the educational, the research is in our backyard, but we've been brainwashed to think, no disrespect to New York and other places, and New Orleans, which has great respect, but it's such a rich, fertile music and art. Everybody, it's enough for everybody to have their own story. And I think that's where I am now. And even with Alabama, I used to hate Alabama. I'm talking about like last year. I can't say it in the same way because there's certain parts of it I like. I love the people that have come from here. I love the history here. But it's still parts of Alabama I hate. And I think that there's so much talent that we can still develop industries here. And I was reading the other day, like the University of Virginia, they offer a major in hip hop, a major. And so like the white people are telling us, we robbing everything y'all do, and y'all haven't still caught on that y'all got all the riches. Mm-hmm. And we're so, we don't look at what the white man really tells us. And I think we need to listen to him and start looking at why is he studying us? Why is he taking the things that we do, what we call second nature, and they turn into a whole industry overnight? And then they put the name on it. They put the hip hop name on it. They put the jazz label on it. It's not us. We don't do that. You know, they come up with the styles. You know, when Disney and stuff, I mean, Disney Child Park, they didn't call it what they did bebop. They just say, oh, this is our music. And so at some point, we got to be cavalier enough and stubborn enough to say, the hell with all of it. Let's have our own stuff. Because I think otherwise we're gonna be lost in, you know, and we're not gonna get it back. I think at some point. Because
Sure.
at some point, Child Park gonna be white. You know.
All right, thank you. Curtis Lundy, I'm gonna give you the final word, man.
Well, I like to refer everybody back to Dr. King's speech at the Berlin Jazz Festival about jazz. And I think that if those of you who know about that speech and have heard it, it really says everything about how he felt about the music. And it really said a lot about what the music really is. And I agree with Cydale in so many ways. And if you remember when I referenced back to segregation, us keeping our own among ourselves and cherishing it is something that we minimize once again. We need to give ourselves, as I said, our own awards. We don't need to wait for others to tell us how great we are. We know that, and we need to acknowledge that. We're the ones who never affirm and confirm ourselves among each other. We need to do that more. We need to say to each other, hey, brother, that's a nice jacket you got on. Hey, sister, you really look nice today. We have an absence of that as a people, where we don't acknowledge one another unless there's a cause. We don't need a cause. We already have one, okay? And it's called the preservation of our culture and our humanity within ourselves as Black people. Because we are separate and we are equal. And there's nothing wrong with that. I was listening to Farrakhan one day, and he described something really simple. You know, he said, well, people have called me a racist, okay? And he looked at the suffix of that word, ist, right? And what it means is that someone who studies something. So if you're a bassist, if you're a violinist, if you're anything that ends with that, then, that means that you study something. Well, in that way, he proclaimed that he is a racist because he's a study of his people. And you know what? I guess in some ways I might be, because I am really in the study of who I am, whose I am, and what I have to do to make sure that that's never forgotten. Among my people, among my family, and among the world. And the music that I aspire to love and call jazz, well, it's pivotal in this whole scheme of things, because it still is the music of freedom. I consider spiritual music, gospel music, whatever name they want to call it, the music of hope, the music of future. And all the blues, jazz, and spiritual or gospel music, as it were, I really feel are the pyramid of where all music has come from and will come from, and is the origin of the music of freedom. So I guess that's kind of how I feel about what's going on and what will eventually be us reclaiming our music. Because I think that's where we are right now. We're in a reclamation project.
Okay. All right. And once again, I'd like to thank our panelists today, those who joined in with us, Mr. Curtis Lundy, Dr. Hezekiah Brinson, Dr. Eurydice Osterman, and I got that spelled out phonetically, so that's how I got it right. Dr. Tyrone Burton and Mr. Cydale Smith, and of course, Mr. Howard Bankhead. I'd like to thank you for coming and joining in our discussion today. Let me mention once again that this project is presented by the Tennessee Valley Jazz Society and is made possible due to a grant from Alabama Humanities Alliance with support from the other community partners. So once again, to all of our participants, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules and joining us today, and may the music move forward. Y'all take care.
Thank
All right,
you.
thank you now.
It's a pleasure.
Amen. Thank you.
All right now, all right.
Okay.